So with that in mind, joining me online now is Lee Hengui, Executive Director, Socioeconomic Research Center, SERC, under the Associated Chinese Chambers of Commerce and Industry of Malaysia, ACCIM. Good morning, Lee. How are you doing?
Hi, thank you. Good morning to you, Tamila.
Now, Lee, can I ask you to begin with how can a progressive wage model or PWM address the historical wage suppression issue that we have been having in Malaysia for some time?
I think it's a widely acknowledged problem that the low wages for the low category workers are reaching a stage where need government intervention. I think the government has started to intervene with the minimum wage order, which was enforced on January 1st, 2023. And now, coming to this year, this is the 5th year of implementation since we started the minimum wage in 2013. Yeah, I think the current minimum wage level for Malaysian workers now is, and also including the foreign workers, 1,005. If you compare the period from the year we started until now, on average, the minimum wage increase is about 5.2% for those in the Peninsular Malaysia and about 6.5% for those in the East Malaysia. I think in a nutshell, if you compare the period where we started to implement the minimum wage until now, the productivity of the workers has not increased significantly. It's only about increased by 2.3%. So now you look at the current minimum wage model, whether it's still a good model to help to uplift the wages of the low category workers. So I think people are toying the idea whether should we consider to implement something similar to Singapore progressive wage model, PMW. I think it could be a more appropriate and feasible wage growth model as ties to the improvement of productivity and training, which under the PMW, there will be an annual increase for the workers, and that gives them opportunity to move up to the ladder of the skill of the career path, so that if they want to move higher, they need to go through a specific training skill and productivity improvement. So in simple principle, we call the working for what you want and you get what you work for. So I think it benefits workers because it maps out a clear career pathway for their wages to rise along with the training and improvement in productivity and standards.
Right. Thank you very much for that, Lee. I think that's a great nutshell. And at the same time, we also should make a note of the fact that when it comes to corporate income to GDP ratio in Malaysia is at roughly 62%, one of the highest in the world, while employee compensation or salaries barely register at about 35% of that. So moving along there, looking at limitations of the PWM, the progressive wage model, and in particular, how can it overcome these two specific barriers, Lee? The first being the continuously increasing pool of low-skilled workers, and secondly, aging or aged low-skilled workers.
I think if you look at the whole concept of PMW, there are a few limitations. I think you rightly pointed out there are two. First is in terms of whether you have to address the presence of low-skilled workers. I think if you look back the root cause of where the wages now for the low category is because of the large presence of the foreign worker in Malaysia. And there's also imbalances of bargaining power between the employer and employee. And as the government tries to balance out this, I think there is always some resistance from the employer. And the employer will say, okay, now I'm willing to pay for this certain level of wage. But whether the employee per se, have they shown improvement in productivity to help the business to grow, to increase the profit, and then there's something a win-win situation between the two. So as we want to implement this progressive wage model to address the presence of low-skilled workers, then we need to synchronize it with the management and supply of the foreign wage worker, which is we are doing now. I think the government in due course will introduce a multi-tier levy, which means that in simple form, it's just to encourage people to reduce the dependency on the influx of the low-wage foreign workers in the economy. If you hire higher percentage of foreign workers, you have to pay a higher levy. So this is something that the government currently is working on that. Fully in due course it will be implemented, and before they implement the multi-tier levy, definitely I'm sure they will be engaging the unit, the employer, the industry, and work together and how
best to implement with minimum disruption on the current operating environment of the business, given that we are still going through a period of uncertainty and wage increases, and also the cost of production has significantly increased over the past 2 years since the post-COVID pandemic. So on the second limitation in terms of the elderly or aging society, so I think one of the difficulty to implement the progressive wage model is how to encourage the elder workers to upskill. I think that's a bit difficult. I think certain elderly people would require a longer time, maybe a specified type of training module in order to help them to familiarize with the new techniques of the production. So that could involve more time and more resources to cater to the needs of this elderly worker. We are not going to be excluding them out from the whole progressive wage model. I think we have to be mindful to be inclusiveness, that everyone will be given a fair share to participate in the company and also in the economy. So I think definitely I believe the employer and the employee and also the government can work out a scheme which is tailor-made to support the elderly worker in the participation of this progressive wage model.
Yes, absolutely, Lee. Of course, because one size does not fit all, it has to go to industry specific and then, of course, sector specific. Now, one last area that I'd like for you to perhaps share with us, Lee, a productivity-linked wage system, or PLWS, which is a flexible, competitive wage system that establishes a closer link between wages and productivity or performance, is, of course, the ideal. How can this actually be achieved by putting us on the path towards PWM, the progressive wage model, first?
I think the chamber, we are the center, the independent think tank of the chamber. I think the industry, and including our chamber, has been emphasizing to the government that I think we need to work towards a productivity-linked, wage-linked system, which means that currently, if you look at the current minimum wage model, once in every 2 years they will review. Okay, if we decided to increase the minimum wage, everyone will get the same quantum of increase, regardless of their productivity improvement, regardless whether they are performer or not performer. So I think with the progressive wage model, which I already mentioned, it is something that allows everyone the opportunity to move up the ladder component of the PWM, which allows you to be having a career path, then a better job prospect, and also you have a sense of belonging, that contribution to the company and to the society and to the economy, and it helps everyone to move up the ladder, in the course of their career path. It's not something like minimum wage. Every 2 years you have an increment, so everyone gets the same. So there's no incentive for the employee to seek out for pay increases, as long as they're willing to go for training, a specific module of training, and there will be specific level of wages for certain rung of the whole career path. Then you are motivated to go up higher. For example, to give you an example, like in the retail sector, in the retail sector, you have different category of the job spec, right? In terms of the job cluster, like your cashier, your retail assistant, or your senior cashier, or your retail manager, or retail supervisor. So under this progressive wage model, the tri-party three party, like the government, the union, and the employer, to work together and decide for each level of this rung what is the wage level and what sort of specific training they have to go through before they move up. So this is the incentive, the motivation for us to move up, for the workers to move up to the ladder. So I simplify it. I mean, the minimum wage is around the PWM is a progressive one, wage system.
Thank you very much for sharing all of that, Lee. And basically, that was Lee Hengui, Executive Director, Socioeconomic Research Center, SERC, under the ACCIM, sharing with us a little bit more about how we can move towards this more progressive wage model in Malaysia. We take a quick break now. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Niaga Spotlight.